to Rambling with Resolveera. Today is our episode number 3, and we have a very, very special guest today to talk about social work. And her name is her introduction. She is Samantha Fletcher, Executive Director, National Association for Social Workers, New York State Chapter. And she is a social worker, she's an activist at heart, and she is all that a social worker would dream of. Welcome, Sam. Thank you so much for joining Rambling with Resolveera.
Thank you so much for that very warm introduction, Vera.
So today we are going to talk about the social workers and the social work profession amidst the pandemic, because it was declared a pandemic in the last 18 months and more, the social work field has experienced a lot. Professionally, supporting the community, managing the pandemic, helping children, helping clients of all ages. And as professionals, we have gone through like so many different experience and stress and crisis. So today we are going to focus on all that. And I would like to start with my first question. Like, as the executive director, as in your position of the New York State chapter for NASW, what do you think impacts the social work profession and the social workers the most, and why?
I think that's a great question, and I'm going to answer based on what I hear from social workers from across our state and also from other states. So the first thing I want to talk about is pay. I hear from social workers all the time that they're underpaid for what they're doing at their work, and I believe this is multifaceted to why this is an issue. I think one reason is because we're a women-dominated field, and we all know the pay gap between women and men. And we also know that women's work has not been as valued throughout history as much as men's work. So I think that's definitely plays into why we're underpaid. I also think that it's because not everyone understands our skill set, and they don't understand what social workers do and what they bring to the table. I'll be talking about that probably a lot tonight because I'm really big on us talking about our skill set and, educating the public about what we do. I would say another issue that impacts social work and social workers in particularly are student loans. Mm-hmm. So we know CSWE just released a report, or recently released a report, showing that, our Black and Indigenous and Latinx and other communities of color tend to have more student debt. So they're more impacted by this than other populations, which is a social justice issue within itself. And I think the reasons for that is because of systemic racism in our society, and that communities of color have not been able to amass wealth at the same rates as white communities. And so therefore families aren't able to help children with paying for college at the same rates. I also think that we as social workers have to do a better job of educating students about student loans and about, programs and choosing programs. When I speak to students and, they're looking at a master's program, I always let them know, I would not pay X amount for a master's in social work, because you can go to this university that's half that cost, and you're going to be in the same place when you graduate. You're going to have the same skill set. And we have a profession that, the people who hire don't tend to look at the school you graduated from. They look at your skill set. What do you bring to this job? So I think we have to do a better job of telling our students this. I think that, like I said before, the general population is unfamiliar with what we do. So, a lot of times I know if I tell someone I'm a social worker, I get the standard reply, you take kids out of homes. I've never done that. I've never had that job. And really, we have a pretty low, I'd say, under 20% of social workers are even in child welfare. We're in every sector of society, and we have a huge skill set that we need to do a better job of letting the general population know about. And we are working on that at the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some systemic barriers. I'm sorry. I want to make sure I tell you everything that our members are telling me.
Right, absolutely.
So we have some systemic barriers. So this is whenever there's policies in place that impede the work. So there's a great example of this during COVID. And that's there was different policies were changing state by state, and insurance company by insurance company, and sometimes the clinicians weren't able to meet with their clients because they couldn't follow the telehealth guidelines that were set out by the state. Also, just sometimes you have organizations that they're just looking to get as many people through the door and get as many billable hours as possible. And that's a barrier for social workers who they want to spend time with their clients and they want to help their clients, but they have to meet their quota. Another one I hear a lot is moral injury. I learned about moral injury when I worked with veterans. And moral injury is essentially when someone has to do something that's against their own moral code. So with the veterans, if they had to kill someone, that was a moral injury because they didn't want to do that. And with social workers, this happens a lot whenever they're at a placement and they have to do something that they don't think is right. So if they're told, I'm just going to use child welfare, if they're told to take a child out of the home and they don't think that child should be taken out, that causes a moral injury for them. And the last one I'm going to talk about is oppression. So I hear from our social workers who are, Black, Indigenous, or another community of color, social workers who identify as LGBTQ, social workers who may have a disability, social workers of, various religions. I hear about how they get discriminated against. Sometimes they're being discriminated against by supervisors or by coworkers. Sometimes they have clients who say things, that are very hurtful to them. So that I think that impacts our social workers as well. And we need to do a better job of, providing that supervision and that support system for social workers who face that oppression.
I'm so glad that you picked up the topic about the COVID issue and also the moral injury. I have been I have worked as a caseworker for child protection. The agency that I worked with was a subcontract with another agency. This was a long time back, but there were many situations where I, went through this terrible, decision-making process, like what is the right thing to do? Isn't there any other way? Isn't there anything else that could be taken care of? So these are very challenging issues. But thinking about the recent situation, the pandemic, my next question would be, how has the pandemic, COVID-19, how has it scored its impact in the field of social work? In the last, I would say 2 years now, how has it affected the social workers, the practice especially? Because we went through a lot of stage, it was kind of a parallel with the pandemic and the political situation.
Absolutely. So I started with COVID. So there were some positive things that came out of COVID and some negative things. So I'll start with the positive.
Absolutely.
I think that through COVID that social workers were able to showcase our versatility. So we are in every sector of society and, every sector of society needed social workers throughout COVID-19. I think that we also demonstrated the need for social workers. So not only are we versatile and we're able to work with all these different populations and different placements, but we're a valuable member of the team. So social workers with those skill sets that we have to talk more about, we tend to be problem solvers, and we tend to take that role when we're on our interdisciplinary teams. So, I heard from social workers from, I think every population and every placement over the last 2 years. And, our clinicians, they are instrumental. We have our, mental health issues have ballooned, obviously, as they would during a worldwide pandemic. And then also with, the racial moment that we've been in and all different things. So people need to, a therapist, they need someone to talk to. So our clinicians are invaluable. Our hospital social workers, they've been on the front lines. They've been, treating this and working with their interdisciplinary team since day one. We have our school social workers who've had to completely rethink, how they engage with students and families. We have our palliative care social workers. What a time with the deaths that we've had across the country and across the state. Our homeless social workers who work with homeless. This has been a big deal during COVID, and trying to keep, COVID out, away from homeless people, protect our homeless population. Policy workers, state workers, anything you could mention, social workers are there, and they've been very needed during this time. Also, I want to just talk about, I think it's positive that we have new ways to practice. COVID has really had social workers adapt, which we can do. That's one of our skill sets, is we adapt and we evolve. And we've done that through this. So, we've had clinicians who've practiced 30 years and never used telehealth, had to switch within a 1-week period. Literally. And they did it. They did that.
That was like a huge change in the field, the telehealth part.
Oh, absolutely. And, that was scary. I mean, I can tell you the week it happened. It was the second week of March. The governor shut down the state by March 16th, 2020. And everything went online after that. And there were no regulations. No one knew what was happening. And, I was so happy because I got several calls, during that time. And not one person was like feeling sorry for themselves, even though they could have been feeling sorry for themselves. They were like, how do I help my client? Just tell me what I need to do to help my client, and it was very much their focus was on their populations. So I think those are really positive things that came out of telehealth, out of COVID-19.
Right.
I think some of the negatives. So in New York State in particular, we had, this category of essential and non-essential workers. That didn't mean like we need to have these workers. It meant who needs to work in person versus who doesn't need to work in person. So I'm a social worker and I did not need to be in person the whole time, through COVID-19. I could work from my house. And there's other social workers who could work from their house. But it made advocacy difficult, just because we represent all the social workers. So we had social workers who had to be in person, who were on the front lines. And then we had social workers like me who were working from home. And again, the general public, the politicians, they don't know what we do. So they don't understand that, we work in all these different sectors, and some of us can work remotely and others can't. So that was definitely challenging. I would say the different policies. So we were under an emergency regulation in New York State until the governor ended it. And he ended it very suddenly in June with he didn't give any warning that he was ending it. So those regulations, and then him ending the regulations, threw everything into chaos, because under the emergency regulations, we knew what the practitioners could do as far as telehealth, as far as accepting co-pays, all these different rules. One thing that was frustrating was that emergency regulation was only, they set it like right after we went on lockdown, but they would only renew it for 1 month or 2 months at a time. Mm-hmm. So every month, I was getting inundated with calls and emails like, what do I do? Can I still practice telehealth? Do I have to go in? Like, that question. So that was really frustrating for, our social workers, because that's the last thing they need to worry about is that. And then also our frontline workers that I've been talking about, they were exposed to COVID. So we had social workers who were contracting COVID because they were on the front lines, helping their clients and working with different communities. So I'd say that was negative. And then there was somewhat of a stigma around contracting COVID, to where people didn't want to tell people that they had contracted COVID. And, so that was tricky. And then I would also say that, telehealth, we've been talking about telehealth, and I think telehealth has changed our profession and changed the way we do things. Not permanently, I think we'll have a hybrid, in-person and telehealth, but people were tired. When they were doing all their appointments online all day, they were really tired. They were telling me that it was very difficult to engage with clients because they couldn't see their nonverbal cues as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes if they were only doing phone calls, that was incredibly difficult to know what was going on. They didn't know if they were private. They had no idea who was in the room with the person. So I think those were some of the challenges that I heard about from social workers.
So as people started getting vaccinated and a lot of relaxation came in, and we are at a stage where we are getting ready for the post-COVID-19 scenario. It's going to take time. It's a slow process. We have still a huge population that still needs to be vaccinated. We have the Delta variant issue around, and we have to take care of that. But just thinking about the future, the post-pandemic situation, what do you think are the hopes and what are the challenges that you foresee in the field of social work post-pandemic, after things come back to normal, or we believe that things are coming back to normal, right? The office opens up, clinics open up, limited visitations, but still there'll be visitations. So what do you think would have the hopes versus the challenging in the field of social work, focusing on mental health, community service, and what will be the role of the NASW New York State chapter?
I'm going to start with the last part of that question.
Okay,
yeah, that's the easiest part of the question. Our role at NASW, my role at NASW, is to serve social workers. That is our number one mission. So whatever those challenges are, or whatever those hopes are, we are here to support social workers in meeting those challenges, overcoming those challenges, and then also making those hopes happen. So that's the easiest part of the question. Like, we work for social workers, not the other way around. So whatever happens, we're there for you. So I think, I really think this is an opportunity for us to reset parts of the profession and to really be more out in front in teaching people about what we do, again, with those skill sets, what we bring to the table, and advocating for more money and all of those things. I think it's an opportunity for us to be more inclusive as a profession and to bring in people from multiple membership groups. My dream is that, social workers look like the UN, that we represent like every nationality, we represent the LGBTQ community, we represent people with disabilities, like that those are the social workers. So I think that there's an increased need for mental health providers. Social workers are the largest providers of mental health services. So, for example, in New York State, we have 60,000 licensed social workers. About half of those are clinical social workers. So they are clinicians, they are doing therapy, and about 30,000 are LMSW. So not every LMSW is necessarily doing clinical work, but we know a lot are, and they're working toward their clinical license. And then, to compare that, there's around 14 to 15,000 licensed psychologists. And there's even fewer mental health counselors and marriage and family therapists. So we are by far the largest provider of mental health services, but not everyone knows that, because again, we're this very broad profession and we do, all sorts of different things, and we have our hands in every part of society. So I think we need to get that word out more. that, we are a huge provider of mental health services. Personally, I would like to ease the challenges with licensing for our social workers. We hear that, sometimes it's hard for them to get their license because of different barriers. That's something we want to work on. We know that sometimes there's challenges with the exam. That's something else we want to work on. We want to just really ease those challenges and barriers for our social workers. I think that another thing we can do is, this is an opportunity. So we talked, I said something like that we want to be more inclusive as a profession, and we want people from these different membership groups going to social work school. This goes to CSWE. CSWE is the accrediting body for every school of social work. And, during COVID-19, CSWE relaxed the requirements for field education. This was game changing, and it was game changing for communities, that had to work. We have social work students who have to work full time in order to go to school, and they're taking courses, and they have to do their field work. So, they were able to go to field remotely. They were able to do different schedules within field, which allowed them to keep their job and do their studies. So I think this is something else that we need to work on, is changing those requirements, because there are certain placements where you need to be there 9 to 5 because you're seeing clients. That's when the organization is open. But there's a lot of places that's not the case. At NASW, our interns, they could, we work flex schedules, so they can work whenever they want to work, because we have that opportunity. We can do supervision in the evening. They can work weekends on the, during the weekend they can work. Same with hospital social workers, in different settings. So I think that's something that CSWE really needs to re-examine and make social work school more accessible. I think with our community service, this is a time for social workers to come in behind community leaders, and work with community leaders, because we have activists within our communities, and we have, the citizens of those communities who are already doing work. They've already been working on injustices and, what they need in their communities. We as social workers can come in behind them and really support them in those initiatives and work with them to see how we can support them. It's just a great opportunity to show that we're here as a resource, as a support for you. Sorry. I think our goal has to be to increase autonomy for, those community leaders that are already in place and already doing the work in the community. I have a hope, I hope that we are able to practice self-care. And, we just added that to our code of ethics with our last delegate assembly. So that's actually now part of our code of ethics, is that social workers need to engage in self-care. I find that we are the worst people to do that. We talk about self-care all the time, but we don't actually practice it. And, this is something we've been guilty of at the office. We were working really crazy hours for the first several months of COVID. And this spring at our office, we made the decision we were not going to do that we can't ask other social workers to practice self-care if we don't practice self-care. So we have been very intentional at, making sure that we actually work that flex schedule, that we're not, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. like every night, and not actually taking some of that time off. And, like I'm going on vacation next week. I'm not going to look at email till I get back. That's new. I haven't done that before, but I need to step away. I know I need that. It's been a really hard year, just like it's been for everyone. So I need to step away and take time, and then I'll come back better. And I think every social worker comes back better when we're able to step away and take time and do that. And I know it's not an option for everyone, but we have to try to support each other so it becomes an option.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you mentioned the diversity. You mentioned that, it's like the UN, that we have, representation from everywhere. And here I would definitely like to mention the diversity committee. that we have at the New York State chapter. And that's a remarkable work that's happening because we have representation from so many different areas and communities. And we have a dialogue. There is conversation, there are concerns being discussed, there are issues being discussed. And we like as we came, along with the recording and the interview right now, that we did talk about, social workers in a practice situation facing concerns when they have a client come in with a certain mindset which might not be matching or having a proper connection with the professional at that time. But the diversity committee, I've seen how it helps, discussing those challenging issues and addressing the culture, addressing the concerns of the communities. So that's a remarkable step, Sam, and I really want to congratulate you for having that running so successfully.
Well, I want to congratulate you as a member because of course it's our members that make that so successful, and what an impressive group you are. All of you are so phenomenal that it's really amazing that I get to sit with you and listen to you talk and hear about all the things you're doing in the community as well.
And it also brings out the activist part of us. And I know you have been an activist, you are an activist at heart. So my next question would be, and I actually wrote it out because I want to read it out to you. So my next question would be that, recently we had, clash of ideologies. We had differences in belief and disagreements. And that played a key role in the social work practice, right? So and it also actually I shouldn't miss that part because it did not just impact the social work practice, but it also affected the work culture in a big way, right? So how does Samantha, the activist, all right, feels about it? So if you step aside from just the executive director position, but you bring out your activist, Samantha, how do you feel about these differences and the impact?
I love this question so much. So I'm going to be very frank with you. So we're talking about a couple different things. One of the things we're talking about is the racial moment that happened with the start of George Floyd. I keep calling that a racial moment, and I do that purposefully because none of this is new. Racism isn't new. Now, what is new is some people found out about it in 2020. Some people are new to the activist game, but none of that is new. I'm Native, as you know. And so when I talk about, racism and the impact of racism, I go back 500 years. I talk about this started in 1492 when the Europeans came. The whole, what is now the United States, was filled with Native tribes. And, within a couple hundred years, we were almost completely decimated. And there was actual genocide of our people. So it starts there. You can't have a conversation about race without starting in 1492. And then we have, just the absolute disgusting stain of slavery, that we had Europeans who took a group of people from their existing societies that were functioning very well and brought them here and sold them and treated them as animals and property. So this isn't new. We've been fighting this fight for hundreds of years. We've called it different things. We've called it abolitionists. We've called it the civil rights movement. Black Lives Matter started in 2012, 2013, somewhere around there, but it's still the same fight. It's the fight for racial justice. So none of this is new. So what happens is for racial justice advocates and people who've been doing this for years, is you have moments within the movement. And when you have those moments, you get to change. So we wouldn't be where we're at now if Selma hadn't happened. Selma was a catalyst. Selma was a lot like George Floyd being publicly murdered in the street. Because with Selma, it was the first time some people saw what racism looked like. They saw Black people being brutalized in the street. John Lewis's head was cracked open. He could have died from that. So you had a lot of people join the movement at that time. And then we got, Civil Rights Act, we got Voting Rights Act. So whenever you have a moment within the movement, things start to change. And that's a good thing. So like for me, when George Floyd happened, I mean, honestly, I was sitting like, why this one? Because Black people are slaughtered every day, every day. I was like, why wasn't it Tamir Rice? He was a child. We saw him be murdered as a child. Why wasn't it, all these other people who've been murdered? I got over that in about a week because I said, it doesn't matter why, we're in a moment. So, we've got to address the moment and do what we've got to do. So, certainly the what's happening with race over the last year has been one of those issues that you're talking about. And it's been a time of reckoning, and we're getting some movement, and movement is painful. I liken it to giving birth. We're going through pains right now, but you have to go through those pains to get to progress and to get to change. We also have what you're talking about, like the ideological differences. Now, I do see a change in this, and I think it's the impact of our previous president and the impact he's had on his party. Because before he came into office, it was a different party. And I don't think when he came in, he certainly did not represent the party, or what they had, parts of it, yes, but like it's a different party now. So I think that's the other thing when you talk about like ideology differences and what happens when people get together and have conversations. So I think that with that, we as social workers have a place in that. We as activists have a place in this. As social workers, our skill set lends to creating critical discourse. We don't get to change without critical discourse. And critical discourse is having those hard conversations in places of work, and even in your social situations. And when we have those critical discussions, it's very important, to set ground rules, and that you're talking about ideas, and you're talking about the ideology, you're talking about the beliefs, but you separate that from the person. And that's really hard to do, because when you feel very strongly about something, you heard me just give history, and clearly I feel very strongly about that history. But my only goal, and I say this all the time, is change. So whatever I have to do to get to change, so that we don't see people being slaughtered in the streets, to where, our kids are safe in schools, to where, LGBTQ people can walk down the street holding hands, and they have, rights and all the policies. Until we get to that, point, I want change. That's what I'm looking for. And one way to get to that change is through critical discourse. Does it always work? Of course not. So we're going to have, times, I worked with someone at one place who was a white supremacist, and I had to share an office with that person, and that was not easy. So I can tell you it was not easy. I was very deep doing racial justice work, sharing an office with someone who was a white supremacist. And, we came up with rules, I had signs on our door that were welcoming people. And then this person put signs up welcoming white people and welcoming men. So I was like, that's fine. I put my sign up, you can put your sign up, but can we put our names on them? Because, I am creating this space for people to come in and feel safe. And I just want to make sure they know that that's not my sign. And I'm sure you want to make sure that your people know that my sign's not your sign.
But it must have been a very difficult situation for you, like accommodating in that environment where you are not only adjusting but ensuring that whoever walks into your room is feeling safe and is comfortable.
Oh yeah, it was stressful. But the reality is he wasn't going to change me, and I wasn't going to change him. So
I love that statement. I love that statement.
And there's a certain percentage of the population you're not going to change. That's just a fact. Now, what you're after and what I'm after in doing this work are those people who figured out after George Floyd that racism exists. Those are the people that we're after, because those are people who are like, I did not understand the extent of this. And what I saw tells me there's a problem. How do we solve that problem? Those are the people we're after. I'm not going to spend my time trying to talk to the white supremacists I'm sharing my office with. We agree to disagree very strongly. And, we have rules for how we conduct ourselves in the office. But I am going to put my time into that person who's like, I just didn't know. I didn't know and I didn't understand, because that's who we can have that critical discourse with and get to a place to like talk about implicit bias, how that happens, how do we change that, how do we change those beliefs and how do we change that? That's how we get to change. So, I'm not sure if I answered your question thoroughly. I tried to separate it out, but that's how I think we're in it doesn't seem like it always, but I feel like we're in a really great place to actually get to progress. And if you look back at those moments within the different movements, I mean, the same with LGBTQ, we wouldn't be where we're at now without Stonewall. Stonewall was a moment that created change, and we always have these moments. So it may seem hard, and it doesn't even seem hard. It is hard. And, we're in the birthing pains right now, but I believe we're in the birthing pains of making progress and making change.
It's part of the growth, it's part of the movement. And you definitely answered my question, because it's talking about being a social activist, being, in your role, how you advocate a certain situation that you stand for, and how you are, how you play the key role of being a resource, a helping hand in leading with the process. So like theoretically, I always support social capital, and I always bring it up and say that we as professionals are the social capitals for the community. It doesn't focus always on the money or always on the material part, but it's how we stand as resources to bring in communities together and help them and connect them with each other for not only short-term goals but also long-term achievements.
You nailed it. Absolutely.
So I also want to take the opportunity here, Sam, in telling our members and our listeners and viewers that NASW is there to support the profession, to support the professionals. And, over my career up till now, and I have seen that, when it comes to taking a membership in the NASW, especially my colleagues in the New York State chapter, there is always like, thinking and rethinking. And I want to take this opportunity here to say that, there's a lot of work going on. There's a lot of change happening. And it's good to be a part of the NASW as a member, so that you're able to get into the dialogue, see what's happening, communicate with your connections, and bring in more representations, so that we stand as a strong wall of activists and advocates as in the field and enhance the field. And that way I think we would be less complaining about the negatives we face, but rather have a more positive growth.
Of course, I appreciate that shout out to NASW. And I'll tell you, my view on it is we have to be an association that people want to join and they feel like they belong. So that is the work that we've been doing since I came here in September 2019. So we do have some initiatives that are open to everyone. You don't have to be a member. You can be a member of another chapter and you can join. So like a lot of our race initiatives, we just started LGBTQ initiatives. So we want to prove to you, like it's that onus is on us. We have to prove that we're an organization worth joining. So that's our goal, is to do that. So I hope that if we've proven that, I hope you do join. And if we haven't and we're missing something, let me know, because we will work to change it, because we're here to serve you. So I do appreciate that shout out.
Being a member, I feel so well connected and it's very informative. I feel like, there's another level of satisfaction as a professional social worker and a mental health therapist. And being a part of the diversity committee, it's changed a lot of perspective. It's brought in a lot of light in my professional career as well. So as we are wrapping up, Sam, our our session today, our episode today, I ask this question to all my speakers, and I would ask you the same. Is like, what piece of advice do you have for the current as well as future social workers in embracing their roles as activists, advocates, and a bigger part, especially after the post pandemic situation, as healers? Because we will be facing a lot of community members who have lost a lot of their resources, a lot of their, many of their loved ones. And our role will be not just therapists, not just hospital social workers, but also as healers. So, advocates, activists, and healers, what piece of advice you have for them?
Again, I just love your questions. So I want to take this in a couple of directions. The first, I'm going to start with communities and how we work with communities. So as a Native person, I believe that my people have what they need to heal themselves. What we don't tend to have are resources. And I believe the same of other communities. I believe they already have what they need because they were living their best lives before whatever challenges came in. I believe that our role as social workers is to support them within that healing. So how do we get you connected to the resources that you need to heal yourselves? So I think that that's really important because we have this skill set that I told you I'd say skill set, all through this interview. Yes. And I know I have. We have this skill set to where we're problem solvers. We're able to intervene. We have all these interventions, but we have to make sure that we're not jumping in front of the people of the community who already have what they need. Correct. So that's, yes. We have to make sure that we're coming in like, okay, what is it your community needs in order to heal yourselves? What would be helpful to you? And then help them secure that behind the leaders of that community and behind the members of that community. We have to learn to collaborate with the community as well as interdisciplinary. I say learn, we already know how to do this. So, we just have to make sure that's what we're doing. So I'll just give a little example with the communities. I worked in a Muslim school. I am not Muslim. I was the first non-Muslim they hired. My job wasn't to go into the school and be like, well, you're doing this all wrong. My job was to learn the culture. And I'm going to say cultures because, we had people from probably over 25 different countries represented at the school. So my job was to learn that and then be like, how do I fit in as a support in this community? And, I worked there for close to 3 years. And, one of the ways that they ended up using me as a support was I would oftentimes go between them and whatever resource they needed. So like, if they were, doing a field trip somewhere and they were hitting resistance, they'd be like, hey, could you meet with them for us? Sure, I could absolutely do that. But it was, however, they directed me to be that resource. So that's kind of an example of what I'm talking about, was for me to learn their culture and to learn how I can support what they're already capable of doing and able to do. We have to reframe ourselves as social workers and be able to list that skill set. Again, that skill set is so important because where I'll see change is when you tell someone you're a social worker and their first response isn't you take, people out of homes or what does that mean? That they'll be like, oh, you have a skill set. Which part of the population do you work with? Because they already know we work all through the population. They already know that we're at all these different placements. That's our goal. So we have to be the ones to tell people, what we're doing and what we bring to the table. We have to advocate for policies. We have to advocate for policies that support the people that we're working with, the communities we're working with, and the individuals we're working with. And so you talked about healers. Definitely our social workers who work one-on-one with people, they are definitely putting out this healing journey for their clients. And they are walking side by side with their clients through this healing journey. And that's just going to continue because, you know, we've talked about COVID throughout this interview. And I've said all throughout COVID, this is a marathon and social workers are at the start line. So we may be like maybe 3 miles into that marathon now, but we're going to feel the impact of COVID for years to come because we, had over 600,000 people die. We've got complex grief going on. We have what you said, the loss of resources. It's just tremendous. If we were to think about all this loss, it's just tremendous. It's the loss of, people graduations, people being able to have an in-person wedding, all these different losses people are dealing with. And this is really where we as social workers can walk beside them on that healing journey and, help with reframing, what happened and, turning these into stories of survival. And look what you've done and look at your resilience. And even if you're not feeling resilient, sometimes you are resilient. It doesn't change the fact that you are, So I think,
Absolutely.
I think these are, all the things that we can do as social workers.
Thank you so much, Sam. That was like, putting everything in a jar and, handing it out like, these are the tools and you can use whichever one works best for you and the community and the clientele that you work with. Especially the part where you said that you don't come in front of somebody who already has those resources, but rather be a bridge to, to that person who needs to reach to that resource, right? It's also like, if I want to place it in a different way, I would say that it's also try to understand the needs, like exactly what the needs are. So a person might come in and might be saying different issues going on, but you have to listen very carefully and identify exactly what's the need is. And that's where the skill set comes in. Right.
That's it, Vera. You just said that's our skill, is that, when I was a student, so the only time I've done clinical work is as a student, but I was working with a couple and they came in and, the wife identified the problem of the couple is that he smokes and she doesn't like it that he smokes. Well, clearly that's not the problem, right? So they have to talk, further. And, my job was to tease out. So it sounds like you have some communication and respect issues, like to tease out what they're saying underneath what they're saying. And then that helps them in the way they're thinking about the problem. That's how we walk beside people on that healing journey.
Right, and that's most of the social workers that you said are in a clinical setup and working one-on-one need to do, because somebody who has lost a resource might just be overwhelmed and frustrated with the whole situation and walk into a social worker's room or a therapist's room extremely angry and just saying, oh, I'm not getting my appointments done and this and that. But the underlying might be an anxiety issue because I don't have a set of professionals who will take care of my health concern, and I want you to connect me to that healthcare service.
Absolutely. I love how you are bringing out that skill set. That's what we bring to the table, right? That's what we bring. And we get there through the conversations that we have with the client and the community. We have to have those conversations so that we can tease out. And then, sometimes we frame that back as a question. So it sounds like what you're saying, or, are you saying that you need help securing this,
Yeah, more like a reflective listening. And I would say that this question that you answered, Sam, is so important for our fresh graduates. and professionals who might be shifting their role post pandemic and might be joining different agencies and work areas and might be facing these situation, and they have to use exactly what tool works best in that particular situation.
Right. I love that. I'm just picturing, when you say this, I'm picturing a toolbox with all our skills in there as
I
tools.
believe we are having a telepathy then, because I had a toolbox in my mind as well.
Yes, and that's what we have to teach people about, is this toolbox. This is what we bring to your team. This is what we bring to the situation, and we're here to partner with you as we go through these changes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Sam. Thank you so much for this lovely interview. I really feel great with this conversation, because this is so much of knowledge for our social workers, for the professionals in the field, for everybody who's listening and watching this. It is something that they can always carry with them, whenever, whichever professional sector you are in. You can, you can just think about the conversation that we just had. You can listen it through your podcast. You can watch it on YouTube, and you can, you can remember, and you can even share it with everybody, because these are certain topics that we are aware of, but sometimes we kind, try to keep it aside, because issues like racism, issues like facing a difficult situation in a practice setup, or addressing needs that are spoken as well as unspoken. We are aware of that, but sometimes when we are too busy working with that, we don't see it as clear because it's too close to your eyes, right? But it's very important that you take a step back and see what needs to be done. And taking a step back, thanks, Sam, for picking up the self care part, because that is also very important, because this is something that we all ignore. We talk about it, we tell our clients, we tell our people, our community members, go for self care, but we don't really do it. So,
We're horrible at it. Social workers are horrible at self-care, and that we have to change. If this last year has taught us nothing else, we have to take care of ourselves, because we are the instrument. We are the tool. So like, other professions, doctors may have a stethoscope, they have, they have their scalpel. Social workers have us. So how can we be our best tool if we're not taking care of us and stepping away and refilling, so that we can, support people while they walk through their journey?
Right. And when Sam and I say stepping away, it's not that you step away and depersonalize yourself. It's not that. It's basically step away to look inside and see what's your need, what you require to do to come out as a better professional.
Yes. So for me, the way I perceive that, when I'm saying step away, like, so next week when I go on vacation, I'm stepping away from social work and I'm stepping into focusing only on my family that I'm going on vacation with. And my focus is going to be on them and not on work, as it should be. Like, this is a time we look forward to this. We look forward to being together. And I know when I come back from that, I'm going to be in such a better place to be able to support social workers better, because I need to do that for me. And, for other social workers, that may mean something else. It may mean stepping away and you focus on your physical health, or, that you focus on your own mental health and you go to a retreat or something, or your spiritual health. So you have to determine what fills you up, so that you can keep giving and working with other people and, providing that healing energy.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. Thanks for this evening with you. And I wish you that you have a great vacation with family. Just relax and, recharge yourself and be back. And I would be keeping you updated about our, further our episodes. This is not the first and the last time that I would be inviting you. I will be calling you because this platform, Rambling with Resolveera, is a platform where my dream is to bring professionals from across the world and talk about issues that are there, but they don't surface, but they lie on the bed. And it's not always very healthy to have things on the bedrock. They need to surface up for people to see and understand the needs and understand what's required, because it's a changing society and we need to change accordingly.
I see this as social action, and I love that you're doing it. And I'm very excited about this series. So thank you for leading this series.
Thank you so much for supporting, Sam. And I would be calling you. We will be discussing different specific topics in social work. So yeah, you can, I would really appreciate that when I reach out for another episode, please have your calendar ready. I'm sure I won't call you during your vacation.
I appreciate that. And you can count on me.
Absolutely.